Hello there everyone, welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you aren't, I'm EDJ. So last video we learned about many more of Caesar's, accomplishments politically, dealing with Rome, and the most interesting one that I found was his contributions to the calendar, and why February, the month I was born in, has like 28 days, occasionally 29, just his contributions to literal time, and years. I'm just like, dude, Julius Caesar, man. I think I love that most of all in this series, just learning about the politics. The battles are cool, don't get me wrong, but I find myself much more interested when Historia Civilis just covers just what they're doing in the Senate and whatnot. But with that said, we're going to be covering a battle, and so last time we kind of left off in a cliffhanger where, Labienus and the sons of Pompey, Sextus and the other one, are making a muck in Spain, and Caesar needs to go and clean it up. So, yeah, let's get to it, shall we? So, without any further ado, we will get to it. If you want to watch the original video without me speaking, the link's down in the description down below. With that said, let us look at the Battle of Munda.
By the beginning of the year 45 BCE, Rome's dictator, consul, Pontifex Maximus, and fledgling authoritarian Julius Caesar received word that Rome's two Spanish provinces had fallen into enemy hands. The enemy was none other than Caesar's old right-hand man, Titus Labienus. Caesar and Labienus were exactly the same age, and may have known each other as far back as childhood, although this is impossible to prove definitively. By the time the two burst onto the political scene in the 60s BCE, they were already close friends and stalwart political allies. Caesar was always the most charismatic of the two, and when he was elected consul for the year 59, he helped Labienus get elected to the lesser office of preacher for the same year. When their terms were up, Caesar secured for himself a prestigious governorship, and as his first order of business, he asked Labienus to come along as his number two. Labienus accepted, even though he was qualified for a province in his own right. The two men spent the next decade bringing Gaul under the Roman yoke. This would forever be Caesar's greatest military achievement, and many would argue, in fact I think I would argue, that Labienus deserves at least 50% of the credit for this. When the Civil War kicked off, Labienus shocked everybody by siding with the Roman Senate. We don't have a clear picture of why he made this decision, but it appears to have come from a genuine place. Caesar extended many olive branches, but Labienus would slap down every offer. Over the next several years, Labienus became a zealous defender of Republican institutions. And now, after the deaths of Pompey and Cato and Scipio and countless others, Labienus was finally the leader of the Pompeian faction, or what was left of it. He knew exactly what to do. Unrest in the Spanish provinces meant that they still required a strong military presence, and many of these legions had spent some time on the Pompeian side of the Civil War. As Caesar's legions back in Rome became rich beyond their wildest dreams, the Spanish legions became more and more unhappy. For Labienus, conditions were perfect. After joining forces with two of Pompey's sons, Labienus launched an attack on the Spanish provinces. Resistance was extremely light, and before too long, entire legions were coming over to Labienus' side in droves. Labienus then began to raise additional legions from local recruits, which proved to be extremely successful. According to estimates, Labienus...
Yeah, I can't deny the competence of Labienus, and I was kind of doing, kind of like Googling him off screen, and yeah, like, you could compare him to this era, and the same, he's comparable to Julius Caesar or like Pompey in terms of like, he is one of the most skilled military commanders, and we saw in his battle with Caesar back in Africa, like he had Caesar on the ropes, as I said, and like obviously not many people can, almost beat Caesar like that, so Labienus is very much a very underrated, but very skilled and competent man in his own right. And learning about him, I think, has been one of the most enlightening things about this series, because I didn't know this dude even existed before I started watching the Kings and Generals and, here the Historia Civilis Caesar series. So, yeah, overall, it's been very enlightening, I feel.
Raised something like 13 legions in basically no time at all.
Wow.
This was huge. It was more than Caesar faced at Pharsalus under Pompey or at Thapsus under Scipio. But the more important fact is this. Caesar knew that unlike Pompey and Scipio, Labienus was his equal. His astounding momentum in Spain put the entire political order at risk. The stakes could not have been higher. Caesar had no choice but to intervene immediately. He left Lepidus, his new number 2, in charge of the city of Rome, and departed with whatever legions happened to be nearby. Since he had just retired a massive number of soldiers, this worked out to approximately 8 legions, a mere 60% of what Labienus had at his disposal. This was, not great, but time was of the essence and it would have to do. It's worth mentioning here that Caesar recruited as an aide-de-camp his late sister's grandson, the 17-year-old Gaius Octavius.
Yes! Happy to see Octavius. So for those of you who don't know, I have quite the... He's my favorite Roman emperor. Augustus, Augustus Caesar is my favorite Roman emperor. He is... I think, in my opinion, the best Roman emperor, and obviously that is beyond debatable, but that's just my opinion. And I have a funny, long history with Augustus. When I was in 5th grade, we had to do a report on someone famous, and I remember, I can't even remember how I found out about Augustus, or how I, came to learn of him. But I said, I'm going to do my report on Augustus Caesar, the first Roman emperor, and I chose him, and I did my little report. I used Wikipedia, obviously. I remember, even my mom was helping me look up this guy, and then, basically that's kind of he's... that's how I mainly knew about him. I knew more about Augustus than I knew about Julius, when I was a child. And then fast forward many years to when I was in high school. During my sophomore year, we had to do a presentation on a historical figure for my history class. I once again chose Augustus Caesar. I even showed up to class wearing a full Roman costume that at this point you'd see in my Kings and Generals videos, that I wear my Roman costume, that I showed up wearing that, and I gave my presentation on Augustus. And yeah, it's weird, but I've had this weird long history that I've known about this guy, and I think there's some weird sense of attachment or fondness that I have towards Augustus, that he might be my favorite historical figure. And so, I'm biased, right? I'm a little biased. I'm an Augustus / Octavian fanboy, so... Which is funny that I would be so on the fence about Julius Caesar, yet here I am constantly praising Augustus, even though Augustus was way more tyrannical, especially during the Second Triumvirate and his rise period. I'm thinking mainly because, Augustus got to live a full life, and he did, and I'm not denying he did awful things, by the way, I'm not blind to that, but I think when he had the chance to live a full life, and we really got to see just, so much of his accomplishments, and I'd say he was overall good for Rome. And I don't know if that's gonna go over well with some people, but I think, in terms of ruling Rome, he did amazing, and he was overall just a political genius. In my opinion, one of the greatest politicians of all time, maybe even the greatest, if you want to debate that, but Yeah, overall, just I think I would probably have more of a concrete stance on Julius if he had lived. I think the problem is Julius died before we got to see his long-term plans and accomplishments come into fruition. So maybe if he had lived longer, I would have a much more concrete instead of a like I said, I constantly been saying I don't have an opinion on Julius Caesar. I don't like the guy. I don't hate the guy. I'm just my feelings fluctuate and they're just like I feel neutral overall, but Augustus, I'm like, nah, Augustus is great. So again, that's just how I feel. That's just my opinion. But, I'm a huge Augustus fan. So, yeah, I'm happy because now he's gonna start taking a prominent role in this series, and I'm just happy to see my boy here.
The boy didn't really do anything on the campaign, but like I said, it's worth mentioning. There, I've mentioned it. Consider it mentioned.
Braden has...
Going any further, let me make it clear that this campaign is pretty badly sourced. The only contemporaneous account is anonymous and borderline unreadable. Historians have been able to piece together a plausible account of what happened, but be forewarned that the evidence for any of this is pretty thin. But nevertheless, here we go. Caesar and his 8 legions set a breakneck pace and were able to make it to Spain in record time. When they arrived, Labienus and the Pompeians were in the middle of besieging one of Spain's last holdouts, the town of Iulia. As we know, Caesar was outnumbered. He didn't want to risk attacking an entrenched position if he could avoid it, so instead he marched on Corduba, one of Spain's largest cities, hoping that the Pompeians would abandon their siege and give chase. The plan mostly worked. A small detachment stayed behind to continue the siege, but Labienus and the rest of the army moved to intercept Caesar. Labienus launched hit-and-run attacks, but Caesar refused to face his enemy head-on. The two sides slowly settled into a weird standoff. Caesar seized a few nearby towns for supplies, but other than that, nobody seemed too eager to initiate battle. Over the winter, the Pompeian army saw some defections. These were mostly from local Spanish soldiers, who were understandably more concerned with the fate of Spanish towns than they were with some Roman political dispute. Labienus sought to minimize future defections by pulling back to the town of Munda. From here, he would plan his next move. Labienus eventually decided that defections and the threat of future Caesarian reinforcements meant that a prolonged campaign was no longer in his interest. This cat-and-mouse stuff had to end. He found a good defensive hill near the town of Munda and planted his army there. Now all he had to do was trick Caesar into attacking. Caesar led his army to the town of Munda and approached Labienus's hill. For the first time, Caesar and Labienus faced each other as equals. The future of Rome hung in the balance. Caesar moved his cavalry to the left and his most experienced legions to the wings. Then, Caesar did exactly what Labienus wanted him to do. He attacked uphill. There were no clever tricks or maneuvers, just each side pushing against the other, sweating and bleeding and dying over every inch of ground gained or lost. It was muddy and brutal and exhausting, and it went on all day. As the sun approached the horizon, the two sides were basically at a stalemate. Perhaps Caesar expected Labienus's army to collapse within the first minutes of fighting. If so, that had been a mistake. The Caesarians were now fully committed, outnumbered and outpositioned. Caesar could see the writing on the wall. He jumped down off his horse, grabbed a sword and a shield, and charged the Pompeian line. He probably didn't actually see any combat, but that doesn't matter. The soldiers got the message. Win or lose, Caesar would share their fate. And then, on the Caesarian right, one of Caesar's veteran legions broke through the Pompeian line. Labienus personally took command of a legion that he had been holding in reserve, and charged Caesar's right. Equilibrium was restored. But then, Caesar's cavalry broke through on his left. Labienus was out of reserves. The cavalry swung around and encircled Labienus's position. The Pompeian army collapsed. Labienus was killed in the fighting. After the battle, Caesar ordered his soldiers to search the battlefield for Labienus's body. They found it. Caesar buried his old friend with full honors in a field just outside the town of Munda. Caesar would later say that he had often fought for victory, but at Munda, he fought for his life.
Wow.
In the coming weeks, one of Pompey's sons would be captured and executed. The other son would evade capture for another decade, but it's safe to say that the Battle of Munda basically put the final nail into the Pompeian coffin. The civil war was over, for real this time. All of Caesar's rivals had been defeated. At this moment, he was perhaps the most powerful person on the planet. He would be dead in a year.
So yeah, rip Labienus, man. Labienus is someone, like I said, it was interesting to learn about him, and I didn't know he existed until these series, so it was enlightening, I feel, to really learn about him, and I have an appreciation. Like, the man was very skilled, and yeah, overall, just rip Labienus, man. Rip Labienus, very underrated man in history. So yeah, guys, we're making breakneck pace. We are now going to be covering, next time, is Caesar as king. So let's get to it. I'm going to jump right to it right now. I'll see you all then. Bye, everyone.